So hello everybody, welcome to today's RISIS Research Seminar. Before we start with the very interesting presentation, let me say a few words that RISIS is currently in a transition phase from European projects, as some of you may know, to an association. And I just would like to say that the RISIS platform is of course still open for accessing the RISIS data sets, but also the different tools that are available there. So check it out under risis2.eu or directly under rcf.risis.eu.io. And you will get news also about the RISIS Association in the near future. The RISIS seminar is clearly one of the most important elements that we will keep alive. And today we come to an extremely interesting innovation topic, out of sight, revealing creativity-led innovation in rural regions. This is a paper by Carolina Castaldi, Nicola Cortinovis, and Milene Tessarin, all from Utrecht University. We have Nicola today here as a presenter, and we have a very distinguished discussant, Fulvio Castellazzi, from the TIC at the University of Oslo. And yeah, we do it as always. We have around 30 minutes of presentation. Then Fulvio will give his comments about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we open the floor for general remarks and open discussion. So Nicola, we're looking forward to your interesting presentation. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Let me share the slides then and worked out before. Hopefully you can see them properly.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
So thanks a lot, Thomas, Gerd, and Benedetto, and everyone involved for having me here, for organizing this seminar. As you already heard, I'm Nicola Cortinovis from Utrecht University, and this is joint work with Carolina Castaldi and Tessarin. And to start, let me give you, well, first of all, a bit of the background of the project. So this research has been carried out in the context of Horizon 2020 project in which we're involved. And if you're interested in the presentation, you may also be interested in the broader project as well, which is called In Situ and focuses on innovation in rural or non-urban regions. So here I put the references in case you are curious and for you to explore it a bit more. But let's say from more like a scientific point of view, the starting point is that the geography of innovation literature, to which well, many of us contribute, or well, most of us are interested, focuses or one of the main takeaways that innovation seems to take care to occur mostly in urban regions. And in that sense, the non-urban regions, therefore, are a bit, even though they are, the larger part of the territories that we study, it's often unexplored, and we don't know much about it. This, at least until recent years, when a more, greater attention has been put on indeed what's happening in terms of innovation in rural areas. And by scanning the literature, we can find that well, there is an emerging narrative on rural innovation specifically. And this narrative, however, has been articulated through case studies or well, more conceptual papers. And what we found is still lacking a bit is an empirical work in, a comparative empirical work in which we can really see how, looking at secondary data, broadly available secondary data, what kind of rural innovation dynamics do we find? So this essentially is what our well, this paper is about. Is what we try to do is to look at not only patents but also trademarks, so as an alternative measure of innovation, and trying to see whether creativity lead to innovation. So if in rural areas, do we find any evidence or any indication of creativity-led innovation beyond the typical measures of science and technology innovative performance? So to try to conceptualize a bit better what these rural regions may offer in terms of creativity innovation and creativity-led innovation, we obviously scanned the literature, and we found that there is actually already some evidence in terms of, let's say, the benefits for creativity in rural areas. Some of these mostly pertain, conceptualization of rural areas as artistic heavens. So because of cultural heritage or natural amenities which may be available there and which offer inspirations of different kinds for creatives, and therefore also help attracting and retaining creative people there, but also aspect more related to the specific communities which emerge. So by the characteristics of rural regions in terms of quality of life, in terms of social capital and possibility to interact with or the slow pace of life, let's put it in more general terms, are aspects which the literature has identified as beneficial for creativity. If we look at innovation, also there has been quite a number of contributions. Scherngell is one of the most known scholars who have worked in this field, and which characterize rural areas innovative, though maybe it characterizes innovation in rural areas a bit in a different way. So specifically, this famous paper from 2015 looks at innovation in rural areas and characterizes it as low innovation. So not focused per se on high tech or in the science-based kind of innovation, but more based on maybe needs which the local community needs to have met, or innovation which doesn't require big amounts of investment for developing, so more sort of bricolage sort of innovation, and as well as innovation which overall occurs more slowly at a slower pace than what we see in urban area. So this is typically how the literature has characterized innovation, and has shown that indeed innovation occurred also in rural areas. Being in rural areas also help innovating, for instance, because of the low, let's say, the freer of the greater room for experimentation, and also to pursue innovation which may be controversial. So here there is a nice paper that I remember reading long ago, and then I for this paper it was nice to kind of rediscover it by Glucker on general economic geography, which precisely look at how subsidiaries of multinational in Argentina were able to pursue innovation, which was considered not so important or not really a priority by the headquarters. So by the fact that they were located in the periphery, so to say, or like not in a very central location, this enabled people in this subsidiary to pursue innovation, which was indeed controversial to some extent. And if we instead look more specifically at the and try to merge these two strands of literature in terms of benefits for creative-led innovation, which are connected to rural environment, we can see that indeed there has also been some literature in that specific respect, which in a way connects to what I already said in the previous two spots. So from the fact that rural innovation can leverage soft assets available in rural areas. Think of specific cultural products or social norms which may be available there and not in the city. Aspects related to distance from the mainstream, and that is more prevalent in urban areas. So here there was also another interesting paper, since some of you guys are from Austria. I forgot the name of the movement, but this architectural movement which emerged in some Austrian province outside, and was on purpose developed there as without really relying on a connection to university and so on, in order for develop it outside the mainstream. So how and Graber and among others stress this aspect of distance as and marginality as some factors which help bringing about innovation in creative settings, and also, well, more in general, something which it's also characterized the rural region is indeed well, not only the higher level of social capital, but also the fact that the type of interactions are different than in urban regions, and therefore potentially viable for spurring creativity and innovation there as well. So from a conceptual point of view, we see that there are good reasons to link, to believe that innovation and creative-led innovation doesn't only occur in the city. Rural areas offer multiple benefits in terms of, for inspiration, in terms of amenities, in terms of social relations, which allow these, at least in theory, these areas to develop innovation, which may be less related to the science and technology innovation that everyone typically thinks of, but which nonetheless is important for the local economy. So this was more from a conceptual point of view, and if we look at quantitative empirical work, here is there are also some interesting studies which on which we base our work.
So sorry, could you mute Serena?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Something wrong. So, for instance, an interesting study, which it's from some years ago, but which looked at European regions and use data from the Community Innovation Survey by Roberta Capello and Camilla Lenzi at the Politecnico in Milan. They study and try to understand how different regions differ in terms of their innovation patterns. And what was interesting for us there was that there were at least two of those classes of regions which were identified as connecting quite strongly, not much to the scientific and technological side of innovation, but more on the creativity-led side of innovation. So maybe not using, developing strong investments in R&D, but nonetheless being able to access maybe through external linkages knowledge and recombine it with what is available locally to produce innovation. In terms of quantitative evidence, there are some studies which do look at the relation between innovation and creativity in local area, but they mostly rely on small surveys. So in a way, they are difficult to generalize. One interesting one is by Tim Voisin and Nichols, which look at a design and how art capabilities available in rural regions actually are help explaining and bringing about innovation in those areas, so that they sort of art and design component is critical for innovation there. Other interesting papers which are relevant for our research are by Neil Lee and Andres Rodriguez Pose, which in an older paper and in a more recent one, the first one looks at the UK and the second one at the US. In both cases, however, they clearly show that creative industries, even though they are more urban, they are also present in more rural areas, and that specifically in the first paper, that the relation between creative workers and innovation is strong. I mean, is equally strong in both rural and urban settings, which already tell us, okay, confirms the idea that creative-led innovation can happen also in rural regions. And in the more recent paper in cities, the Rodriguez Pose and Lee look again at, they have a very catchy title. I'm always jealous of people being able to find very catchy ways to title their papers, and this one is hipsters versus geeks, and they look at STEM occupation and creative occupation, and to try to understand which of the two drives most innovation in the US metropolitan areas. And what they find is that even though clearly innovation, which they proxy by patents, is more strongly related with the STEM sort of occupation, the best performance in terms of innovation occurs when both STEM and creative workers are present in a relatively high share. So this again provides some indication on the role of creative workers in stimulating innovation, even though one of the important critiques here is that a lot of, not a lot of these studies, because at least those based on surveys have different proxies for innovation. But for instance, the last study by Rodriguez Pose and Lee does use patents to capture innovation. And this is to some extent a problem, especially when we know it's a fact that the type of innovation that patents capture is mostly science and technological related innovation, which is typically much more difficult to produce in rural areas because the kind of requirements and inputs that are needed for generating patents. So based on this, one of the innovation of our paper is to not only look at patents, but also combine, offer a perspective on the role of trade on innovation measures through trademarks, which we think for a number of reasons can make much more sense for looking at innovation in non-urban regions. So here I have highlighted with the arrows the four specific reasons why trademarks may be particularly important for studying innovation, rural innovation. And these have to do with, as I was mentioning, the type of innovation that is encapsulated by this measure. So the patents one is more technical, technological, science-based innovation, whereas trademarks is mostly based on it's more product or service innovation, not per se technological, and oftentimes related to a specific product. The type of knowledge base that trademarks leverage is mostly like the more symbolic one, as opposed to the analytical, so the more science-related or synthetic, the one that, let's say, applied science sort of knowledge base. Trademarks capture more the creative and cultural dimension, which is, as we know from the literature that we just discussed, very important for rural areas. The type of occupations which are mostly related to these different measures of innovation are, again, one is more technical, engineering, STEM, and the one for trademarks instead is more based on creative occupations and cultural occupations, design, and most importantly, maybe the type of firms which engage and are pursuing this type of innovation, which for patents, we know is typically because of the type of investment which are required both in terms of resources and time. These mostly large firms, whereas for trademarks is well, all sorts of firms, from Nike to small SMEs. They all can engage relatively easily in trademark activity. So this is just to sort of conceptualize a bit where we stand in terms of literature and how we try to contribute to the literature with this paper. As you know, it's an empirical paper, so here is some more information about the data. We use the data from the European Labor Force Survey, which provide information by region in terms of what occupations are there, and using the standard classification by Eurostat, we focus on occupations which are creative or cultural. So one important aspect to mention here is that as every one of you carrying out empirical research and using secondary data from Eurostat and so on, there is always some choices to make in terms of what level of aggregation are you able to use. So in this case, for the ISCO, we can only use 3-digit, which is quite detailed, but we were hoping for better. This also has implication in terms of what kind of regions we are able to see. As you see in the third block, I should have probably moved it, but we are looking at NUTS2 regions. This is because, that's what Eurostat makes available, which creates a problem in a way, because most of classification of urban and rural regions instead is at NUTS3 level. So we have to be creative in a way to find a way to connect the two. And what essentially we do is we look at the population, the amount of population which lives in different NUTS3 regions, and based on that we classify NUTS2 regions depending on whether they are predominantly urban or predominantly rural. So this is about for the regions. And in terms of innovation, as I already mentioned, we look at both patents, which comes from the OECD RegPat database, and new trademarks, which we retrieve from the Intellectual Property Office of the EU. So all in all, we have a panel with about 247 regions. Some of them are at NUTS2. I mean, most of them are at NUTS2. Some of them are NUTS1, specifically for the UK, and for the Netherlands, it's at the country level. Unfortunately, this again is not our choice. It's simply dictated by what kind of data is available in terms of European Labor Force Survey. And we observed these regions throughout the years 2011, 2019, and we studied the relation between how many, so what's the level of creative occupation in a certain region, and what is its performance in terms of innovation, looking at patents and trademarks. So here I have a bit of descriptives in terms of the spatial distribution of trademarks and patents per 1,000 of employees, and what we can quite noticeably see is that patents, so the one on the right hand side, are much more concentrated spatially. You see that if you are essentially outside of what used to be called the blue banana, there is not much going on in terms of patenting. So if you look at Spain or Poland, it's extremely low values. Whereas if we contrast that with what we see on the left hand side, looking at trademarks, we see that actually, even though obviously the blue banana and especially the more urban or urbanized regions score relatively higher, we see that there is much more spatial heterogeneity in terms of the level of trademarks. What if we look at creative occupations? Well, here you see the other map, and you see that even here there is quite some, again, urban areas, from Madrid to all the capital regions, from Warsaw to Prague. They all score relatively high, but nonetheless, we see that even in areas which are typically considered less advanced, if you think of, well, Andalusia in Spain or other peripheral regions, the share of creative occupation is still relatively high. If we just compare, the average in terms of patents, trademarks, and creative occupation, we pretty much get the same sort of insight with the rural regions, well, performing typically low in terms of patent intensity, trademark intensity, and the share of creative occupations. But in a way, especially if we look at creative occupation, the gap seems to be somehow smaller. So it's more in terms of patent intensity, rural regions have less than half of the intensity of urban regions, whereas the gap is smaller for creative occupations. Okay, so moving on now to the more to the actual results. So essentially, maybe I should have put an equation, but I also know, I remember from my colleagues saying that if there are equations in the presentation, people usually get the third. So I just try to give you the main intuition, and if there are more questions, I'm happy to take them. So essentially, what we are studying here is like as a dependent variable, we use the number of the log count of patents per employee, per 1,000 of employee, and the same, so log count of trademarks per 1,000 of employee across different regions. And we try to explain it, and our main variable of interest is the amount of creative share, or of creative occupations in that region, which we capture by this creative share. These variables are all light, so in that sense, we look at how the creative share in 2015 is related to the innovation output of the region on the following year. We use we have region and time fixed effect, which help us controlling for well, variables that we can hardly measure, so reduce the concern for omitted variable bias. And our main and we have a number of controls which go from human capital, which is the share of people with tertiary education, to the share of firms which are small or medium, and the share of employment in high-tech services and manufacturing. So what do we find essentially is that when we look at the relation between creative occupations and patents, actually not much is there to be found. So in that sense, creative occupations are not related to the patent output, let's say, of the region. However, when we look at trademark, the situation changes. So here, instead, we find a strong and positive relation between the share of creative occupation in a region and the amount of trademarks per person employed, per 1,000 of people employed in the following year. So this is when we look at the whole sample, and then since we're interested in rural region, is we move on by and split our baseline results in urban and rural regions, which you see here. And what we find, so on the left-hand side, and what is labeled as table 6, we are only looking at rural region, whereas table 7 on the right-hand side, it's for urban regions. And what is interesting is that essentially for trademarks, also for patents, the picture hold, in the sense that for patents, we didn't have any significant relation before, and also now, once we introduce all the controls, we do not find anything significant. for both rural and urban regions. Whereas when we look at the trademark, we still find a strong and positive significant relation for urban and rural regions, with actually the effect of the creative share being stronger for rural as opposed to the urban ones. So this suggests that the presence of a creative share is particularly important for innovation in rural regions. Well, okay, this was to highlight the second table. And so these are essentially our baseline findings that indeed suggest that the innovation in rural regions is strongly connected to creativity. We do perform some robustness checks. Specifically, we look at an alternative measure of creative occupation. So before we were looking at the share of creative and cultural occupation over the total employed people in the region. Now instead we changed the denominator of that share by only looking at what has been labeled the inventive class. So those are only those occupations which are connected to invention. So think of both creative and STEM sort of occupation. When we do this, we still find a strong and significant relation between creative occupations in the region and the innovation output in terms of trademarks, with again the stronger effect being for rural region as opposed to the overall sample. Then since in the team we are all economists and we are all thinking like, okay, this is clearly potentially very endogenous, we go ahead and use a two-stage least squares to try to build an instrument and reduce the concerns for capturing any spurious relation. So let me briefly explain. So just to show you that essentially the findings that were before pretty much hold, but how do we go about instrumenting for creative occupation? Well, we use essentially a database that you see a screenshot here in the top left corner from which is called Pantheon, and it's a very interesting database because it leverages Wikipedia entries and essentially by and then for every Wikipedia entry, the people behind this Pantheon database calculate in how many languages that entry is reported and how many visits that entry gets, and based on this information, it sort of creates a measure of memorable people or people which have been influential. And what is very interesting here is that, as you see, besides the specific name of the person behind the Wikipedia page, we also know the occupation and as well as the place of birth and death. So essentially what we do is we get all this data and we assign we filter those occupations which are matchable to, or that we can consider creative. Here in the table B1 you see essentially how we match ISO codes to these Pantheon categories. For some of them are very straightforward. If you see like architects and what is the occupation architect was in the Pantheon database, but others are a bit more difficult to match. But essentially, so we use this information to measure historically how many people, how many creative, notable people, memorable people were born in a specific region of Europe between the 1800 and 2000. So 2000 is actually they cannot have you know, they have to pass away before 2000 in order to make sure that our instrument is exogenous. And so we use this information to calculate for every region what's the share of memorable people born in that regions which were created. And this gives us a measure which we are going to use as an instrument once we interacted with the like a time variant measure of so the creative share of occupation at European level. So for the whole Europe, every region gets the same score across the different years. So these allow us to build what is called a shift share instrument, with the share part being you know, provided by this Pantheon database very much, and the shift being coming from the total variation at the EU level. And the intuition behind the instrument is that we may think that those areas which are historically able to generate a high share of creatives, well, they may have something special about them, which either because of the cultural norms, because of the type of amenities which are available there, because of the set of social relations and culture which characterize those regions, well, those may be, you know, these special characteristics in a way should be able to may explain why well, in the past there were many creatives, and this may help us predict in an exogenous way the number of the share of CCOs in creative and cultural occupation in the region nowadays. As well, this is actually what I showed you already before. Since I'm actually I'm doing with the time, I'm probably towards the end. This is just to show you that indeed.
It's fine. You can, Nicola, 5 minutes or something.
Okay, so but I'm on my second last slide. So this is just to show you that those relations that we were finding. So once we use this instrument in this two-stage square setup, we still find that our exogenous measure of creative occupation is for which, well, I didn't report it here, but you know, the F-test and the first stage looks as we would expect. So from a technical point of view, this instrument seems to be convincing. And in terms of results, we do find pretty much the same patterns. In this case, we see that the rural regions don't have anymore like a stronger or like a higher coefficient than the baseline, but this may be due to the fact that yeah, so we are not sure how come, but you know, already the fact that the relation point in the same direction is reassuring in that sense. Okay, so this is just like to try to summarize a bit the main key points of this paper. So we started looking at the literature on creativity and innovation in rural regions, and try to explore how whether rural regions are suitable places for creativity-led innovation. And we do provide some indication, some robust indication that indeed creativity-led innovation can thrive also in rural regions. We see that what is very important in being able to detect these patterns is how we measure innovation. So if we were looking at patents, we wouldn't find much at all. But since we're looking at trademarks, which capture a different type of innovation, as I was discussing in that table earlier on, and a type of innovation that is more symbolic, less related to science and technology, and more connected to indeed creativity. Well, once we look for that, we do find that rural regions can and indeed are innovative. So the key takeaway message here is that it's you know, very important to think very carefully what you want to measure in terms of innovation, because just kind of going for what's standard in the literature, like looking at patents, may actually conceal some innovation dynamics, and whereas in our case, looking at trademark was indeed very revealing. We are not done with this work, so I'm happy to hear what Fulvio and the audience. Any feedback from Fulvio and the audience. And next step that we're already considering doing is looking at different classification of rural regions and see if we can improve it there, and alternative measure of innovation, maybe also take into account the quality of innovation. That's something which, for patents is I think standard and easy to compute, whereas for trademark is a bit more complicated. A gender perspective, whether gender may play a role in or rural areas may facilitate innovation from women, but also since we also know that the rural areas structurally tend to be weaker, whether how to reconcile these findings in terms of innovation with the lack of development in rural regions. So if there can be also innovation without development. So these are for the next steps. But so thanks a lot for the attention, and again, I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for the very clear and extremely interesting presentation. Not only in terms of new insights into innovation in rural areas, but also in terms of new indicators for innovation in general, in this case trademarks that come under increasing discussion now. So this is really very interesting work, I have to say. But I would like to hand over directly to Fulvio for providing his remarks and comments from his perspective. Fulvio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me here and giving the opportunity to be discussant here. I guess, Nicola, could you please maybe unshare the screen? I will not use my own slides. I will just give a few considerations now, and then you can share again if you need. So first of all, let me say that this is a very nice paper. Reading the paper, it was nice, useful. I learned a lot. A paper that looks like it is at quite an advanced stage. It is well written, clear, and careful in explaining the empirical details, robustness checks, and so on. So this is a paper that we are likely going to see published in a good journal soon. That's my guess. The most important point of the paper, I will repeat it again because it is worth mentioning. When using traditional measures of innovation, such as patents, it is difficult to find correlation or effects in terms of innovation or creativity in rural regions. While this paper shows that if we use trademarks-based indicators, we do find relevant effects. So basically, it is these methodological points that is the main novelty and contribution of the paper, which is nice. This point is, let's say, not entirely new because there are already a few papers suggesting in the last few years the use of trademarks as indicators of innovation. So there is a recent strand of research led by, for example, Carolina, Mendonça, and a few others. And there is also a Norwegian paper, which I happen to see. I think that it was shared in the chat, the link to that. But anyway, what this paper does specifically is to use this new literature on the use of trademarks as indicators of innovation as a way to contribute to a new topic, that is the measurements and identification of innovation and creativity in rural regions. So to contribute to this specific debate. So this is something that I like and that I think is important and interesting. Now, I have two main comments and some minor points, which I will mention just if there is time available. The two main questions that I have are the following. The first refers to the dependent variable trademark. What you use now is a general number of trademarks per capita in each region, which means that the trademarks count includes all types of trademarks done in all sectors, all occupations, and so on. And then I wonder whether in this paper, or maybe in follow-up future papers, you could construct a more specific dependent variable, which is not the number of trademarks in general per capita in the region, but actually the number of trademarks developed and applied for in specific sectors or in specific occupations. So, for example, I see in one of your appendixes, there is a list of, no, sorry, this is another point. So basically the idea would be here to connect trademarks classifications, which are available, to some sectors or occupations which are more likely to be represented and relevant for your own paper. I know this would take some more time, but this is a question whether you want to do in this paper or in the next one in order to get a more specific dependent variable. The second main question that I have refers to the main explanatory variable that you have. The explanatory variable, as you explained clearly, is the share of cultural and creative occupations in each region using a classification by Eurostat. So here, looking at one of your appendixes, I see that the list of creative and cultural occupations that are included here is quite broad and heterogeneous. So the concept of cultural creative occupation is quite broad, although it's interesting. For example, it includes occupations such as diverse as handicraft type of activities, teaching and education related occupations, and then tourism related activities, and finally also technical occupations. So you can think that some of these occupations are related to some type of sectors, industries, such as knowledge-intensive business services, whereas others are related to public education services, or even to low-tech traditional services, agricultural activities, and so on. So basically, your explanatory variable is quite broad and heterogeneous. And here, what I would ask you, if possible, is whether you can divide this variable into 3, 4, 5 more specific variables, depending on this type of activities that they do. This would be interesting because this would be, I guess, quite an easy way to have some more insights about the transmission mechanism that is relevant here. So, for example, what are the type of occupations which are more related to trademarks? Is it, for example, teaching educational activities, or handicraft, tourism, or technical occupations? So I guess that you could, if I understand the data correctly, you could easily split your variable into different variables and get a more specific understanding of which of these variables drive the results.
Yeah.
And related to this, I also think that perhaps you could try to interact your main explanatory variable with two variables that you have already as controls in your analysis in order to get some more understanding of heterogeneity patterns and transmission mechanisms. So you could interact the share of creative occupations with your variable measuring knowledge-intensive business services. Or you could, in addition, try to interact this variable with the human capital variable to see to what extent and where the level of human capital interacts with this type of creating activities, whether there are, let's say, low human capital activities or rather high human capital activities which drive the results. Yeah, so these are my two main points and a couple of more specific details before a general conclusion. Specific points about the methodology, the econometric aspect. I like your econometric approach, and I also like the instrumental variable that you use and the discussion. So I think that your results are quite robust in a sense, and I do not have any major concern. But as a minor robustness check, I would say that first of all, I wonder why you have used static panel model analysis, whether you could use instead a dynamic panel model specification, a GMM or something like that, to see to what extent these results would hold. A dynamic panel model would also allow you to consider endogeneity issues. A second minor point is that you could try to, when you discuss the results and you present them, you could try to quantify the effects of the main result that you get on the role of the creative and occupation share of employment to quantify its relevance. For example, to say, given your estimated coefficients, what would happen if some policies would increase by 1% the share of creative occupations in a region? What would be the effect in terms of increase of trademarks in that region? This would speak clearly to policy because it would be interesting. We could share creative occupations by opening up a new school in a region or a new university or some other policy measure. So that would be a nice way to connect directly your econometric findings to policy implications. And the third and final minor point is the following. In table 11, and you have also reported that in your slides, in table 11, basically you show that when you use instrumental variables, the effects of the share of creative occupations on trademarks is actually stronger in urban regions compared to rural regions, which is different from what you get when you do not use instrumental variables. So it would be interesting to elaborate, discuss a bit more these results. This result does not contradict your paper, so it's not challenging. But in a way, it's interesting because it shows that if we believe this identification strategy, still it is the case that in a way, innovation measured by trademarks is stronger by about 30% according to your estimation in urban regions compared to rural regions. So that qualifies a little bit the relevance of your results, in a way, the main motivation that you had at the very beginning of the paper. Okay, one final minute to conclude on a topic that I like very much, that I think is important. You have one sentence in your conclusions that I would like to emphasize. Basically, your paper has a focus on a long tradition in regional economics, which focuses on the importance of innovation. So we want to understand here creative activities in rural regions because they could be important to foster innovation. But what is important to note also that innovation by itself is an important policy variable because we assume, we take it for granted that it is a variable that creates economic growth, competitiveness, export. So it is a variable that we are interested in because it fosters economic performance of regions. However, what is ultimately important for policymakers is social welfare and the well-being of people. And I think here there is an important possible extension of your paper in the future, because I think we could make the argument that people, individuals working in creative occupations, there is literature on that would support the idea and the argument that people working in creative cultural occupations, they are likely to have a higher job satisfaction and well-being at work than individuals working in different types of occupations. So regardless, and in addition to innovation effects, it may be important to look at this topic, not only because creative activities foster innovation, but also because creative activities by itself can be a source of well-being, job satisfaction of workers employed in these activities, which ultimately is a very important target variable for policies. So this is a topic on which I'm working at the moment, not on the role of creative activities, but on the importance of well-being for social welfare. So I just wanted to conclude with that and mention that this is a very important topic for future research beyond the focus on innovation that you have had in this paper. Thank you and good luck. I think we're likely to see this paper published in the near future, so good luck with that.
Thank you, Fulvio, for the reflection from your side. Very valuable. Nicola, I guess you want to react to it.
Yeah, very quickly. Thanks a lot, Fulvio, and I think I really like all your comments. I think that and they were all very inspiring also for different reasons. So I really very much agree with the second one, especially about try to boil down a bit better the mechanisms behind which are the creative occupation which contribute more to innovation, and either by selecting specific type of creative occupation to understand indeed which is the mechanism, which mechanism is at play, but also in terms of the interaction, maybe that there is something which it can be done. Also, connecting to your very last point about the social welfare and the quality of the quality of life, let's say, in those that is something very important to consider. I was wondering whether that's also something which maybe we can play with. I could also imagine that there are creatives in specific rural regions which maybe they're out of constriction or out of better options, and so that maybe have a kind of a lower welfare, social welfare, and therefore their impact may be actually not as strong as if you are willing to be in that specific rural region for either family reasons or inspiration or whatever. So that maybe could also be something which we can somehow play with. And I also like the suggestion of trying to to test a bit better the robustness of the result with the dynamic panel and quantifying better the impacts. Maybe I can respond very briefly about the instrument. That's also something which I am a bit puzzled with. The explanation that I give myself is that I guess that if you think of historically, the coverage of like Wikipedia may still be somehow kind of urban biased, in a sense that in Rome or in Florence or Amsterdam, in the big centers, probably historically there is a higher share of of creatives, and then those are the ones which are going to be picked up more by Wikipedia. So my explanation would be that maybe that share is somehow a bit biased towards urban regions, and therefore once we look only at rural, the effect is a bit weaker compared to our baselines. But so that's what I think is going on, and that's why we find a weaker relation in rural rather than in urban regions. But that's something which we definitely need to look better into. But so thanks a lot, and I don't want to take more time from the audience. So
thanks, Nicola. So we open the floor for comments, questions, discussion points from the audience. Please simply raise your hand, or you can also write it in the chat. Maybe Eric, you posted your pointer to the paper. Maybe you want to reflect a little bit on it also from your perspective in the discussion.
I'd be happy to, Thomas. Thank you. A very interesting paper. I posted a paper where we suggested that one uses RISIS data going forward. So I'm very happy to hear this paper, which uses data suggested in RISIS. I basically concur with the comments from Fulvio, especially. I would just point out a couple of the points from the trademark data about the how interlinked trademarks are in general to overall productivity. You know, there's a tautology between the two, so you sort of have to control for that in a meaningful way in order to derive effects. And the one paper I point out where we also have microdata, and we're backing out the number of new firms in the regions, etc., allows us to sort of narrow down the effects and output the trademarks per GDP, millions of GDP, for example. Obviously, we can't do that for the whole of Europe, but there are some confounding aspects, factors beneath this very aggregate sort of level on the where you have the main dependent and independent variables are fairly high level. So I mean, that's fine, but it's good. It's something to reflect on also when you're thinking about the mechanism here. And here, I would like to dig a little bit deeper. One, in what because you can adapt for the classes, obviously, of the trademarks. It was the point that was raised, and it's not entirely clear how you see most of the classes in the trademarks actually interacting or on these creative occupations, because most of them have to do with manufacturing services that have nothing to do with occupations in the creative industry. So there's maybe I'm missing something. I haven't read the paper yet, so I look forward to that. That's sort of to go back into the literature, back into the 90s, to find out more about what why firms trademark in the first place, and that's stuff you and Castaldi know everything about. But so it needs to be spelled out, I think, to make the argument. The second thing is the choice of the RISIS data. That's great, but there's a selection in who uses the EU IPR trademarking channel. Most of the smaller firms, which will be in the regions, will be using the national offices, and they will also respond a lot to the foreign demand for trademarks in their own markets. So a lot of what you will see in your own trademarking activity for a given region is they're reacting to other the big players in other countries that trade marketing in their market. So those sorts of things about the granularity of the data, the choice of the data, and moreover the mechanism, which needs to be really convincing, I think, would be useful. But otherwise, I welcome very much the work, and I think the question about occupations is a really important one. And I just point to our paper where we're also looking into employment effects and etc.
Thanks, Eric, for this reflection. Nicola, any response to it, or it's
Yeah, I see. I mean, especially the first point is, if I understood correctly, was I mean, the first point about why using trademark is that so the weakness there is that, like, okay, the services that may be trademarked or what is maybe trademarked is not per se connected to CCOs. That was your point, and therefore, like, it's unclear what mechanism may be there. That's true. I wonder whether, and I mean, I'm not as experienced as Carolina on trademarks, but I wonder whether this is something which is specifically a problem for urban regions more than I mean, rural regions. I wonder whether they mostly rely on specific products or like specific goods and products which are typical for their from the area. But this is something which indeed it's good to look into it, and especially then the second point about using the EU versus the national, that's indeed I think a big one. In a way, playing my own advocate, I guess this may be actually meaning that we underestimate our that our effects are on underestimation, but it's it needs to be proven. So that's what we're gonna work on. Maybe looking at least do a robustness check maybe on one specific country and see whether that's something which kind of align with our result could already be a step forward in that respect.
Yeah.
But thanks a lot, Eric.
Maybe just to follow up, national data, but also more specific tranches of the trademarking that you look at, because you're using a very broad net by collecting every trademark. You could just focus on the advertising trademarks.
But then would you, because that's also a bit of a thought that I had, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, if there are questions, I'm ready.
No, go ahead.
But
go ahead.
Also, this connects to the point of Fulvio before. I wouldn't exactly know how to justify only looking at specific trademarks. I say like, I'm just going to look at whatever food, agri-food products. And then look at in rural regions maybe there is a stronger effect because of but you're also looking at that specific kind of industry or product which is much more common in rural versus urban. So then I don't know if they would have any suggestion in that respect, how to what kind of markets, trademark markets to focus on.
Very short, because I don't want to monopolize, but there's a nice correspondence from Zola et al. On from the classes to I6, which allow you to do things, and then if you control for, like we do, the regional GDP of those regions for those industries, then you're able to line up that effect much better. And then you back out the number of new firms in those regions, etc. Then you find an effect that's related directly to the trade.
Yeah.
So there are ways to go about it, but it's sort of difficult when you try to expand from the national to the international.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thanks. Further comments, questions from the audience? I would like to raise two remarks from my side and one question. First, Nicola, you mentioned that you think the choice of the NUTS2 regions, of course, is not perfect. You may have a look at the NUTS adapted classification that we developed within RISIS, because actually it may address one of the weaknesses you mentioned. So there we cut out NUTS3 regions out of NUTS2 regions, which with a very high knowledge production volume, and this may better define your rural areas, so that you cut out, like Oxford and Cambridge, this may be part in your rural NUTS2 regions, which of course may blur a little bit the overall results that you have. But that's just a minor comment. On the econometrics, I fully agree with what Fulvio said. I would maybe add one point, and I have to say that as an economic geographer, the only thing I was a bit surprised is that you completely neglect geographical space in your estimation. And in particular, in the topic that you are addressing, this may be a point for future research, because you may consider that the distance from rural areas to center areas, and not only the geographical distance, but maybe also the creative distance, to speak in your terminology, to other regions, may have an important impact on their patent and trademarks intensity. And this is maybe it's another robustness check maybe, but I think it would really enrich your results extremely in terms of the geography of innovation discussion that you, of course, in Utrecht know very well about. So I just say this as a remark. And a final question, do you have any analysis or idea, because you always treat patents and trademarks separately, right? So these are separate models or something. Do you have any analysis on how trademarks influence patent production or vice versa, or is this completely untapped area at the moment? Eric says yes.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, we didn't look into it, but I wonder whether, you know, again, looking into it, you also need to take into account the urban versus rural, so to say, because I can see that in the urban, you know, if you only look at cities, or probably if you look at the aggregate, there's going to be a strong positive relation between the two, but that's probably be driven by, you know, Paris, Amsterdam, Milan, Munich, and so on. Whereas, so I wouldn't know. I mean, I can imagine there is a relation, but I guess that it's probably, you know, yeah, very much biased towards urban regions. So then, but again, I'm not aware of papers which have precisely looked into it. So I cannot answer the question. But it's a very interesting point. Maybe.
Yeah. Eric, you wanted, you seem very excited.
Well, because this is something I've been working with Statistics Norway on linking the microdata patents and trademarks, but not necessarily in this context with the regional setup. It's more to look at the effects of public R&D support on these outcome variables, including patents, trade and trademarks. So the correlation, I mean, the timing of those bundles, the IPR bundles sort of idea, which the EPO and other some interesting publications on recently, not least on there's a trademarking paper in research policy recently. But yeah, we're looking into this, but at the national, using national level data, because for Norway, not an EU member, the coverage for the EU IPR office is very, very low.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, if there are no further questions, comments, or remarks, I think we can close the session for the day. And I would like to ask Serena to display the slide for the next seminar. And until then, if it comes, let me thank the audience, and in particular, of course, Nicola, thanks again for joining us. Extremely interesting work. This will be also distributed on Zenodo, and also Fulvio, thank you very much for joining us and having the remarks. And as the slide is obviously not coming, let me hint you to the next seminar that will be on January 15. It is on sustainability rankings and sustainability performance, assessing the relationship, by Chiara Alberti from the University of Bergamo. And you will get the invitation again, and also everybody who has registered to the seminars will also get the already full program for the next year. So this is a lively platform, and we are happy to welcome you back in 2025. As this is the last seminar before Christmas, it's also my pleasure to wish you a Merry Christmas and all the best for the next year. Thanks for participating. See you soon.
Thanks a lot. Also to Fulvio, thanks, and Eric and everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.